"Get down. Get the fuck down." The command split the night like gunfire, seconds before the real shots followed. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness, and the air exploded with chaos. Tires screeched. A child screamed. Then, silence broken only by the sound of a body collapsing onto concrete. He ran toward the noise, his heart hammering, feet pounding the pavement. What he found stole the air from his lungs. His son, his only boy, lay sprawled in a pool of blood, eyes wide with terror, chest heaving in short, broken breaths. 3 officers stood over him, their guns still hot, their faces blank, untouched by humanity. "Stop," the father shouted, voice cracking. "He's just a kid." But the chief, his badge gleaming under the streetlight, with a single glance, he silenced the scene. "Report says he pulled a weapon," the chief muttered coldly. Case closed. There was no weapon, only a cell phone, still glowing faintly in the boy's lifeless hand. The father dropped to his knees, cradling his child, blood soaking through his clothes, staining his skin. His cries tore through the night, raw, guttural, animalistic. But the officers turned away, their footsteps fading like ghosts. In that moment he understood the truth. This was no mistake. It was a system engineered, protected, enforced, a machine of lies and silence, built by men like the chief. His world ended that night, buried under flashing lights and falsified reports. But from the ashes of his grief, something darker began to rise. Vengeance. And this time, he swore, the system would bleed. Before the blood, before the sirens, before the silence that would forever haunt him, there had been life. Simple, ordinary, beautiful life. On Saturday mornings, Marcus Hayes rose early, the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the small 2-story home he had worked a decade to buy. The neighborhood was no mansion-lined suburb, it was modest, lined with cracked sidewalks and stubborn weeds, but it was safe, or so he believed. He took pride in keeping his front porch swept, the garden trimmed, the house painted every other summer. He wanted his children to know stability, to feel a kind of peace he himself had been denied growing up. His son Jamal was the heartbeat of that house. 17, lanky and restless, always with headphones hanging round his neck. He had a grin that could break tension in any room. The kind of smile Marcus secretly prayed he'd never lose to the world's cruelty. Jamal talked about basketball constantly, about college applications, about how he wanted to study architecture one day to build something that lasts. Dad, something that stands taller than hate. And then there was his daughter, Ava, only 9, curls, wild, and eyes always questioning. She followed Marcus around like a shadow, tugging at his shirt when he left for work. "Promise you'll be home for dinner," she would ask, holding out her pinky. He always hooked it with his own answering, "Promise." Marcus's wife, Renee, tied it all together. She was warmth in motion, the laughter at the table, the quiet reassurance at the end of every long day. When Marcus grew weary from double shifts at the factory, Renee was the one who steadied him. She reminded him that everything they endured, the bills, the grind, the small sacrifices, was for the children, for a future brighter than their own. The Hayes family loved their rituals. On Sundays, Marcus grilled in the backyard, smoke curling into the sky as neighbors gathered around the chain-link fence. Kids played tag until dusk, women swapped recipes, and men debated sports scores like it was life or death. Laughter carried across the block, blending with the scent of barbecue sauce and charred corn. For a few hours, the world's ugliness couldn't reach them. On weeknights, Marcus helped Jamal with homework, scratching equations on scrap paper at the kitchen table. When Jamal grew frustrated, Marcus reminded him of his own youth, how no one had believed he'd ever escape poverty. "But I did," Marcus would say. "And you'll go further. Don't let them tell you otherwise." Jamal always nodded, determination burning behind his eyes. One spring afternoon, Marcus found himself at Jamal's basketball game, the gym echoing with sneakers squeaking against polished wood. He cheered until his throat went raw, Ava bouncing on his lap with every basket her brother scored. When Jamal hit the game-winning shot, Marcus leaped to his feet, pride swelling so fiercely he thought his chest might burst. He hugged his boy tight after the final buzzer, whispering, "I knew you could do it." Life was not perfect, but it was theirs, ordinary, honest. And in that ordinariness lay its beauty, the fragile beauty of a family who believed, against the odds, that love and hard work could shield them. Marcus clung to that belief with both hands, unwilling to imagine a world where it might shatter. Yet, even in those quiet, golden moments, shadows lingered at the edges. The patrol cars that slowed a little too often in front of their house, the sideways glances at Jamal when he walked home at night with his hoodie up, the times Marcus caught Renee staring out the window, worry etched across her face, though she said nothing. He ignored it all, convincing himself it was nothing more than paranoia. After all, wasn't he doing everything right? Working hard, raising his children with values, staying out of trouble. Wasn't that supposed to be enough? He didn't know then that fate had already marked them, that the system he trusted to protect his family had been built to betray them. For now, though, there was laughter. For now, there was love. For now, Marcus believed they were safe. But safety, he would soon learn, was an illusion. But safety, Marcus would soon learn, was an illusion. The signs began as whispers in the dark, small, almost dismissible details that could have been nothing, but together painted a pattern he could no longer ignore. It started one evening as Marcus walked home from his shift. The streets were quiet, the glow of porch lights flickering in the distance, when a patrol car rolled slowly beside him. The window lowered, and two officers stared out, faces pale in the yellow wash of the street lamp. Long day at the factory, Hayes. One of them drawled, his tone not friendly but mocking. Marcus stiffened. He hadn't told them where he worked. The car trailed him for 3 blocks before peeling away with a burst of laughter. That night, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his boots, trying to shake the unease. Renee touched his shoulder. "Ignore them," she whispered, but her voice trembled. Days later, Jamal came home furious, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames. "Cops pulled me over walking," he spat. "Said I looked like someone they were looking for. They searched my bag, Dad. My school bag." His voice cracked, equal parts rage and humiliation. Marcus tried to calm him. "They're just trying to intimidate you." But deep down, he knew better. This was not chance. It was targeting. Soon after, Ava began waking at night, saying she saw men sitting in cars across the street. Marcus would step outside, but the vehicles always pulled away before he could approach. Sometimes he thought he saw the same pale faces, watching, waiting. The pressure built like a storm. Neighbors whispered about men who had gone missing, families who had been paid to stay silent, justice that never came. One older woman, Miss Lorraine, pulled Marcus aside after church. "Be careful," she warned, her voice low. "That chief don't play fair. He's buried worse than you can imagine." Marcus wanted to believe it was paranoia, but unease became certainty the night everything shattered. It was late. Marcus had just finished dinner with his family, laughter still echoing from Ava's silly jokes. Jamal stepped out to meet friends, promising to be back before curfew. Marcus watched him walk down the block, tall, confident, headphones bouncing against his chest. He had no idea it would be the last time he saw his son alive. Minutes later, the sound tore through the night, gunfire, sharp and merciless. Marcus bolted outside, sprinting toward the noise. His lungs burned as he turned the corner, and there, bathed in the harsh glow of flashing lights, lay Jamal. Blood soaked the pavement. His eyes stared at nothing. Around him, officers stood with weapons drawn, their faces expressionless, like butchers at work. Marcus's scream ripped from his chest. He pushed through the line of uniforms, dropped to his knees, and cradled his boy's body. Jamal's phone lay inches from his hand, its screen cracked, glowing faintly with the music he'd been listening to. No gun, no threat, just a child murdered in cold blood. "Why?" Marcus roared, tears streaming, his voice breaking the night. "He's just a kid." The officers said nothing. Then the crowd parted, and Chief Harland stepped forward. He was a broad man with iron-gray hair and eyes that revealed nothing. He didn't look at Jamal's body, only at Marcus. "Report says he pulled a weapon," the chief said coolly. End of story. Marcus's mouth fell open in disbelief. "That's a lie. You know that's a goddamn lie." But Harland only leaned closer, his voice low enough for Marcus alone. "You want to keep your little girl safe. You'll shut your mouth and move on. Accidents happen in this town." Then he turned to his men. "Wrap it up." Case closed. Marcus's world tilted. His son was gone, and the system that was supposed to deliver justice had already decided to bury the truth. The officers gathered their things with clinical detachment, their boots tracking blood as though it were nothing more than spilled paint. By the time they left, there was no crime scene tape, no evidence collection, no paperwork, just silence and grief, heavy as the night itself. Neighbors who had seen everything lingered at the edges, faces pale, eyes lowered. No one spoke. Fear was thicker than the smoke from the chief's cigar. Later, Marcus would try to fight. He would file complaints, request reports, demand explanations. But every door slammed shut. Witnesses misremembered. Body cam footage malfunctioned. The case file was misplaced. The system devoured the truth piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a single, damning narrative. Jamal had been armed, dangerous, and his death was justified. But Marcus knew. He had seen the glow of that phone in his son's hand. He had heard the chief's warning, And as he sat alone in the quiet of his house, Renee sobbing in the next room, Ava clutching his arm with wide, terrified eyes, Marcus understood what Miss Lorraine had meant. Jamal's death was not an accident. It was a message. The chief had covered this before: other sons, other families, other lives swallowed whole. And now Marcus had joined the long, silent line of victims. Only he would not stay silent, because if the system was built to bury the truth, Marcus vowed to dig until the earth bled. Because if the system was built to bury the truth, Marcus vowed to dig until the earth bled. But before vengeance could take root, there was only grief. The days after Jamal's murder blurred into a suffocating fog. Marcus sat at the dining table for hours, staring at the empty chair across from him. Jamal's backpack still hung from the hook by the door. His sneaker size 11, scuffed from basketball practice, rested against the wall as if waiting for him to slip them on again. Every object screamed absence, each detail a cruel reminder that his son was gone. Sleep abandoned him. Whenever his eyes closed, the night replayed itself in violent loops: the crack of gunfire, the weight of Jamal's body in his arms, the chief's cold whisper. He woke, drenched in sweat, Renee shaking him as he gasped for air. "It's just a dream," she whispered. But it wasn't. It was memory, raw and jagged, slicing him open again and again. Guilt gnawed at him, relentless. He should have walked with Jamal that night. He should have insisted he stay home. He should have protected him. Instead, he had watched his son vanish down the block, believing safety was still possible in a world that had already marked them. The guilt burrowed deep, festering into some. Renee tried to hold the family together, but grief cracked her voice, bent her shoulders, hollowed her eyes. Sometimes she lashed out at Marcus. "You're supposed to keep us safe," she shouted one night, her fists pounding the kitchen counter. The words cut, but he didn't fight back. He believed them. Ava clung to him tighter than ever, refusing to sleep unless he stayed beside her. She woke sobbing, whispering, "Will the police take me to—" Each question stabbed Marcus with helplessness. How could he protect her when the very system sworn to protect was the predator? Marcus sought justice, desperate to believe that if he followed the rules, truth would prevail. He filed complaints with Internal Affairs, each page detailing the events of that night. Weeks passed, then months. No answers came. When he visited the precinct, officers stared him down, their smirks barely concealed. "Still chasing ghosts, Hayes," one of them muttered as he passed. At City Hall, he demanded meetings with council members. They shook his hand, offered practiced condolences, then shuffled him out with promises that evaporated the moment the door closed. One official leaned in, whispering, "The chief has friends everywhere. Do yourself a favor, let it go." The final blow came when the medical examiner's report arrived. It listed Jamal's cause of death as justifiable homicide. It claimed officers fired in self-defense after Jamal brandished a weapon. Marcus's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, lies inked on official paper, sealed by the city's stamp. Jamal's life erased with a pen stroke. Marcus's anger boiled over. He stormed into the church one Sunday, interrupting the pastor standing before the congregation, voice shaking, he shouted, "They killed my boy, and they're covering it up. Where is God in this?" The church fell silent, eyes wide with shock. Some bowed their heads, others shifted uncomfortably. The pastor placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, murmuring, "God will provide justice in his time." Marcus ripped away. "His time? My son is in the ground now. What good is his time?" His voice cracked, and for a moment, the man who had once been the community's rock collapsed into raw desperation. Renee led him out, her face flushed with shame, though tears ran down her cheeks. The isolation deepened. Friends stopped visiting, afraid of being associated with his fight. Neighbors who once waved, now turned their eyes away. Even family members urged him to move on. "Think about Ava," his brother pleaded. "Don't risk her life for revenge. You'll never win." But Marcus couldn't let go. His nights became consumed with digging. He pored over old newspaper clippings, records of unsolved deaths, whispers of boys who had disappeared. A disturbing pattern emerged: cases that never made it past the first report. Names erased, families silenced. Each story mirrored his own. One night Marcus found himself back at the street where Jamal had been killed. The stains on the pavement had faded, washed away by rain, but in his mind they burned fresh. He dropped to his knees, pressing his palms against the ground, whispering, "I'll find the truth, son. I swear it." His voice cracked, carried away by the wind. But as days turned into weeks, hopelessness pressed harder. He sat alone in the living room, whiskey bottle in hand, staring at Jamal's photo. His reflection in the glass looked foreign, eyes hollow, beard unkempt, shoulders sagging. He thought of ending it, of slipping into the same silence that had swallowed his son. For a fleeting moment, the idea of peace tempted him. Then Ava's laughter echoed from upstairs, bright, innocent, unbroken. It snapped him back. He couldn't leave her. He couldn't surrender, not yet. That night, Marcus faced the truth he had been avoiding. The system would never help him. It wasn't broken, it was functioning exactly as designed. The police, the courts, the officials, they were all pieces of the same machine, protecting each other while crushing those who dared to resist. The realization was a cold, brutal clarity. He could file 1,000 complaints, beg 100 officials, pray until his knees bled. It would change nothing. His son's life meant nothing to them. And so, as Marcus sat in the dark, photo clutched in one hand, Ava's laughter still echoing faintly in the air, something inside him shifted. The grief remained, sharp and suffocating. The guilt clung, heavy as chains. But beneath it all, a spark ignited a fire not of hope, but of resolve. If the system would not deliver justice, then justice would have to be taken. If the system would not deliver justice, then justice would have to be taken. But to take it, Marcus needed to know who and what he was truly fighting. At the center of it all stood Chief Raymond Harland. For nearly 2 decades, Harland had ruled the city's police department with an iron hand and a carefully polished smile. To the public, he was a decorated officer, a man who had restored order during times of unrest. He appeared at ribbon cuttings, shook hands at charity drives, and sat in the front pew at church every Sunday, his family beside him like a portrait of American respectability. But Marcus knew better. He had seen the cold calculation in Harland's eyes the night Jamal died, the way he dismissed a child's life with a flick of his tongue. Harland was not the kind of man who shouted or raged. His power was quieter, sharper. He believed himself a guardian of order, but his definition of order was penning, the hierarchy that kept men like him untouchable and families like Marcus's crushed underfoot. In private conversations, he often reminded his officers, "We're the wall between chaos and civilization. Don't ever forget that. If the wall cracks, this town burns." It was a creed his men absorbed, twisted into justification for their brutality. Take Officer Kellis, for example, a stocky man with a mean grin who had been on the force less than 5 years, but already carried the swagger of someone who believed the badge gave him the right to play God. He was one of the shooters the night Jamal died, and afterward, he boasted in whispers at the bar about teaching the boy a lesson. To men like him, black lives were not protected by the law but subject to it, bodies to be policed, not people to be respected. Then there was Sergeant Doyle, older, wearier, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much. He didn't laugh like Kellis, but he didn't intervene either. When Harland ordered silence, Doyle obeyed, even when it ate at him. He told himself he was keeping his pension, his family, his job. Quiet complicity, he reasoned, was survival. Men like Doyle made the system function, not through cruelty but through cowardice. The corruption didn't end with the police. City officials were tied to Harland's hip. Councilman Breck, a slick politician with ambitions for the state senate, depended on Harland to keep the city in line. Harland's men patrolled Breck's campaign rallies, made sure protests were crushed before they reached headlines, and in return, Breck funneled funding into the department. Even the courts were tainted. Judge Harlan Whitford, no relation to the chief, though people often joked they shared the same blood, had dismissed countless cases of police misconduct. His rulings always leaned toward insufficient evidence, his justifications laced with legal jargon that disguised a simple truth. He owed his seat to Harlan's endorsement, and he would not bite the hand that had fed him. Together, they formed an ecosystem, a machine that consumed lives and spat out silence. And Jamal was not the first. Through whispered conversations and sleepless nights of digging, Marcus unearthed the ghosts buried beneath the chief's empire. There was Malik Turner, a 15-year-old boy shot after allegedly brandishing a knife during a traffic stop. No knife was ever recovered. The official report vanished into a file cabinet no one could access. There was Denise Carver, a young mother whose death in custody was ruled a suicide, though bruises on her body told another story. Her family had tried to sue, but the case was thrown out by Judge Whitford before it even reached trial. There was Anthony Rivas, pulled over for a broken taillight and later found in the morgue with broken ribs and a fractured skull. The official explanation: resisting arrest. Each story echoed Marcus's own. Lives destroyed, evidence erased, families silenced. Each time, Harland appeared before cameras, voice solemn, promising transparency, while behind closed doors he tightened the noose of secrecy. The genius of Harlan's corruption was that it was never blatant. To outsiders, he was the face of authority, a man who could quote scripture, shake a preacher's hand, and tell the public exactly what they wanted to hear. He never shouted racial slurs, never openly spewed hatred. Instead, he cloaked his actions in the language of safety and order. "We're here to protect the good people of this town," he often said, standing at press conferences in his crisp uniform. "But when criminals cross the line, we will respond. That's the price of law and order." To his supporters, he was a hero. To his officers, a father figure. To his victims, a nightmare. And he was untouchable. Complaints vanished. Witnesses recanted. Journalists who pushed too hard suddenly lost their jobs, their sources drying up overnight. The chief had strings tied to everyone: politicians, businessmen, even pastors. His reach was suffocating. Marcus studied the man obsessively, trying to understand how someone could justify so much blood. The deeper he looked, the clearer it became. Harlan didn't see himself as corrupt, he saw himself as necessary. In his mind, the town was fragile, always on the verge of chaos. He believed that by crushing certain lives, he preserved the rest. That belief made him even more dangerous than men like Khalees. Harlan wasn't motivated by greed or cruelty alone. He was driven by conviction, and conviction was harder to kill. The realization sickened Marcus. His enemy was not just one man, but an entire system built in Harlan's image. The officers who laughed, the officials who signed papers, the judges who dismissed cases, they were all cogs in his machine. Some reveled in their power, others rationalized their silence, but together, they maintained the illusion of law while burying truth beneath its weight. And now Marcus had a choice. He could keep screaming into the void, begging for justice that would never come, or he could accept what he was truly facing, a war against an empire disguised as order. He sat in the darkness of his living room. One night, Jamal's photo on the table before him, the faint hum of a patrol car idling outside. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened. He thought of Malik, Denise, Anthony, all the names erased before his son. He thought of the chief's whisper, the smug certainty in his tone. Accidents happen in this town. No, they weren't accidents. They were executions. And the man responsible wore a badge, polished so clean it blinded the public. Marcus leaned forward, staring at his reflection in the photo's glass. For the first time since Jamal's death, there was no helplessness in his eyes, only rage, sharpened into purpose. The chief had built his empire on silence. Marcus Hayes was done being silent. Marcus Hayes was done being silent. The night he stared into Jamal's photo, rage sparking into resolve, something fundamental shifted inside him. He was no longer a man begging for justice, he was a man preparing to take it. The first step was knowledge. Marcus began collecting everything he could about Chief Harlan and the officers who served under him. It started small newspaper archives. At the library, microfilm reels of old articles yellowed with time. He scribbled notes in a battered spiral notebook, circling names, drawing arrows between cases. Soon, patterns emerged. The same officers appeared again and again. The same phrases repeated in reports. Suspect resisted, weapon recovered, use of force justified. But beneath those clinical words, Marcus uncovered blood. He spent nights combing through public records, sometimes staying up until dawn with only coffee and anger to keep him awake. He discovered a half-dozen cases eerily similar to Jamal's. Black men dead after encounters with the same handful of officers. No convictions, no discipline. Each case had been buried beneath the same machine of silence. One name surfaced most often: Officer Kellis, the man with the cruel grin. He had been present at Malik Turner's shooting, at Anthony Reevers's traffic stop, and now, at Jamal's death. Marcus's pen dug deep into the page as he wrote the name, circling it until the paper tore. But evidence wasn't enough. He needed witnesses, people willing to speak. That proved harder. Families were terrified. Doors closed when he knocked. Phone calls ended abruptly once he explained who he was. Some wept quietly and whispered, "We can't risk it." Others slammed doors in his face. The fear was thick, suffocating, a testament to how completely Harlan's shadow blanketed the town. Still, Marcus persisted. He met one mother, Denise Carver's sister, who clutched a photograph as she spoke. "They told us she hung herself in that cell," she said, voice trembling. But Denise was strong. She had 2 kids. She wouldn't have. Her words dissolved into sobs. Marcus placed a hand over hers, promising, "I'll make them answer for her." Every story fueled his fire. Every photograph added to the wall he had begun to build in his basement, faces of the dead, names written in red ink, lines connecting them back to Harlan's empire. Renee discovered it one night and froze at the sight. The wall looked less like an investigation and more like an obsession. "This isn't healthy," she whispered, eyes wide. "You're drowning, Marcus. You can't bring Jamal back by hunting ghosts." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'm not hunting ghosts. I'm hunting killers." "And what about Ava?" Renee demanded. "What happens when they come for us too? What happens when you're the one in the ground?" Her voice broke on the last word, and Marcus felt his resolve tremble. He loved her. He loved Ava, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jamal's blood, heard the chief's whisper, "Accidents happen in this town." He kissed Renee's forehead, voice low. "I can't stop. If I stop, they win, and Jamal becomes just another name they bury." For weeks, Marcus lived two lives. By day he worked his factory shifts, tried to smile for Ava, pretended to grieve quietly like everyone expected. By night, he dug, followed leads, tracked movements. He learned where Kellis drank after hours, who Doyle owed money to, which judge's son had been pulled over with cocaine but never charged. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. One evening, as he drove home, headlights flared in his rearview mirror. A car tailed him for miles, edging closer until the bumper nearly kissed his own. Marcus gripped the wheel, sweat slicking his palms. Only when he pulled into his driveway did the car peel away, its tires squealing into the night. A warning. Renee begged him to stop. "They know what you're doing. Please, Marcus, let it go before they kill you too." But Marcus had crossed the line where fear mattered less than justice. Still, he wrestled with himself. Each night, staring at the wall of faces, he asked the same question. Was he seeking justice or revenge? Justice meant truth, exposure, accountability. Revenge meant blood for blood. He wasn't sure anymore which he craved more. The turning point came with Kellis. Marcus followed him one night after his shift, trailing the patrol car at a distance. Kellis stopped at a bar on the edge of town, where cops gathered to drink and brag. Marcus sat in his truck, engine off, watching. Hours passed. Finally, Kellis stumbled out, drunk and loud, bragging to a fellow officer. Kid had it coming. Marcus heard him slur, words drifting through the humid air. Should have seen the look on his face. Bam! Just like that, Marcus's hands clenched the steering wheel, every muscle screaming to get out and break the man's jaw. But rage alone wouldn't win. He needed proof, so he pulled out his phone and hit record. The audio wasn't perfect, muffled, broken by car doors slamming, but the words were there, clear enough. A cop boasting about killing a child. For days, Marcus debated what to do. If he turned it over to the authorities, Harlan would bury it before sunrise. If he leaked it anonymously, Kellis might walk away with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Then Marcus remembered the families who had whispered their fears, the neighbors who lowered their eyes. He realized this wasn't just about courts or trials. It was about truth being seen. So he called a local journalist, one of the few left with the courage to print stories that made the chief uncomfortable. They met in a diner at midnight, the hum of neon lights casting shadows across the booth. Marcus slid the phone across the table. "This is Kellis," he said. "The man who murdered my son." The journalist pressed play, eyes widening as the recording crackled to life. When it ended, she whispered, "If I run this, they'll come after me too." "They already came after me," Marcus replied, voice steady. "It's time people saw who they really are." 2 days later, the story hit the front page. Officer caught boasting about shooting teen. The town erupted. Protesters filled the streets, chanting Jamal's name. For the first time, Harlan's polished mask cracked. Kellis was suspended. Not fired, not arrested, but suspended. Still, it was a crack in the wall, proof that the machine wasn't invincible. That night, Marcus stood in his basement, staring at the wall of faces. For the first time since Jamal's death, he felt something flicker inside him, not peace, not joy, but power. It was only a beginning, a small win, but it proved what he had suspected all along. The system bled when you cut deep enough. And Marcus Hayes was ready to keep cutting. The story about Kellis had barely hit the newsstands when the blowback began. At first, Marcus felt a dangerous thrill seeing his son's name chanted in the streets, hearing the roar of voices demanding accountability. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs with Jamal's face. For the first time since that night, Marcus felt like the truth had cracked through the lies. But cracks invite repair, and Harlan knew how to patch them fast. 2 days after the article, Marcus found his car tires slashed. The following morning, someone spray-painted Leah in blood-red letters across his front porch. Renee scrubbed at it with trembling hands while Ava cried inside, asking, "Why are they doing this to us?" Marcus felt rage rise, but beneath it, fear slithered cold through his chest. These weren't random acts. They were warnings. Then came the knock on his door. 2 officers stood on the porch, faces stone, badges gleaming. "Mr. Hayes," one said, "we've received a complaint about harassment. Word is, you've been threatening Officer Calise." Marcus stared at them in disbelief. "Threatening? He murdered my son." "Careful," the other officer said, his smile thin and cruel. "False accusations can get you in trouble." They left a card on his table as they exited, the chief's name scrawled across the back. A message clear as daylight: "We're watching you." The retaliation didn't stop with intimidation. Marcus's factory job, the one steady anchor in his life, suddenly became unstable. His supervisor called him into the office, eyes avoiding his. "We've had concerns, Marcus. Rumors that you're bringing negative attention to the company. We can't afford bad press tied to your name." Marcus clenched his fists. "So I lose my son, and now you want to take my job too?" The supervisor sighed. "I'm sorry, it's not me. Orders came from higher up." Marcus walked out with his final paycheck in his hand, rage pounding through his skull. He knew exactly where the pressure had come from. Harlan's reach spread further than the department. Renee grew more distant with each passing day. She avoided the basement, refused to look at the wall of faces Marcus had built. One night, she confronted him in the kitchen, her voice sharp with fear. "You've turned our house into a war zone. Do you even see what you're doing to Ava? She jumps every time a car passes the street. She doesn't sleep. And me. I'm terrified every time you leave the house, wondering if you'll come back in a body bag." Marcus's jaw clenched. "What do you want me to do, Renee? Pretend Jamal never existed? Let Harlan walk free? Let Kellis keep bragging in bars about murdering kids?" "I want you alive," she snapped, tears brimming. "I want Ava to have a father who tucks her in, not a ghost chasing revenge. You're obsessed, Marcus. It's eating you alive." Her words stung because they were true, but obsession was all he had left. Without it, there was only grief. Even allies began to waver. The journalist who had published Kellis's recording called him weeks later, her voice trembling. "They've threatened me, Marcus. My editor wants me off the story. They said if I print another word, I'll lose my job or worse. I can't keep doing this." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "You can't back down now. We finally have them scared." "I have kids," she whispered. "I won't put them at risk." The line went dead. Another door closed. Another ally gone. The police turned more aggressive. Marcus noticed unmarked cars parked outside his house at odd hours. When he drove, they followed. When he walked into stores, officers lingered nearby, hands brushing their holsters, eyes cold with silent threats. One night, returning from a late drive, Marcus found his front door ajar. Heart pounding, he rushed inside. Renee and Ava were huddled in the living room, terrified. Their bedroom had been ransacked, drawers pulled open, photos torn from walls. Nothing stolen, only destroyed. "They said if you don't stop, next time they won't just break things," Renee whispered, clutching Ava close. Marcus's fury burned white-hot. They weren't just trying to silence him, they were breaking him piece by piece, stripping away his job, his allies, his family's sense of safety. And yet, the more they pushed, the harder he dug in. But resistance came at a cost. Marcus's obsession began consuming him. He stopped eating regularly, his frame thinning, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He spent hours in the basement, connecting strings of red yarn, piecing together timelines, memorizing patrol schedules. His wall grew monstrous, an entire map of corruption stretching across the plaster. Sometimes he swore he heard Jamal's voice. Not real words, only echoes, laughter fading in hallways, the shuffle of sneakers across the kitchen floor. At first, he dismissed them as exhaustion, but soon, he began whispering back, "I'm coming, son. I'll make them pay." Renee caught him once, murmuring to the wall like a madman. Her face crumpled, and she left the room without speaking. The breaking point came with the frame dash up. Marcus was driving home one night when red and blue lights flared behind him. He pulled over, pulse racing. 2 officers approached, smirks carved into their faces. "Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Hayes." Confused, Marcus obeyed. Moments later, one officer opened his trunk and discovered a bag of cocaine. Marcus's stomach dropped. "That's not mine." The officer shrugged. "Funny thing though, it's here, which means you're under arrest." They cuffed him, drove him downtown, shoved him into a holding cell. Hours ticked by. Marcus thought of Renee, of Ava crying, of Harlan smirking somewhere in his office. This was the end, but then, unexpectedly, the case fell apart. The drugs disappeared before evidence could be logged. A clerical error, they called it. Marcus was released at dawn, shaken but free. He knew what it really was. A warning shot. They could end him anytime. Tonight had been a rehearsal. Back home, Renee confronted him again. Do you see now? They'll destroy us all. Please, Marcus, stop before they kill you or worse. Take Ava too. Marcus's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his hollow eyes. If I stop, Renee, then Jamal died for nothing. If I stop, they win forever. I can't. I won't. She turned away, shoulders shaking. For the first time, Marcus wondered if she might leave him. The final betrayal came from someone he trusted, a childhood friend named Darren, who had stood by him since the funeral. Darren had been his sounding board, the one who said, "Keep fighting, brother." But one evening, Marcus overheard Darren speaking in hushed tones outside the bar, handing information to a uniformed officer. The betrayal cut deeper than any threat. When Marcus confronted him, Darren wouldn't meet his eyes. I got kids too, man. You're poking a hornet's nest, and I can't go down with you. Marcus walked away, fury boiling, trust shattered by now. Marcus's life was unrecognizable. Jobless, isolated, under constant threat. His only anchor was Ava, her small hand gripping his, her laughter a fragile thread keeping him tethered to humanity. But even she looked at him differently now, as wide with fear, as if she saw a stranger where her father used to stand. Still, Marcus pressed on. He gathered files, recorded conversations, dug deeper into Harlan's empire. The system was bleeding him dry, but with every attempt to silence him, his determination grew sharper, deadlier dot, because if the system wanted to bury him, they would have to dig a grave deep enough to hold a father's fury, and Marcus Hayes had nothing left to lose. Marcus Hayes had been pushed to the edge of himself, jobless, isolated, hunted, his family fractured, his allies gone, yet his determination had hardened into steel. Each night in the basement, surrounded by faces of the dead, he whispered the same vow. It ends with Harlan. The chief had taken Jamal. He had taken the lives of countless others. He had turned the town into a prison where truth was buried under polished lies. If Marcus wanted justice, he could no longer chip at the edges. He had to cut the head off the beast, and so he prepared. For weeks, Marcus tracked Harlan's routines, his drives to City Hall, his evenings at the lodge, the nights he lingered in his office long after the precinct emptied. Marcus memorized patterns, marked weak points, calculated risks. He acquired a gun, the same model officers carried, its weight cold and unfamiliar in his hand. Each night he sat staring at it, torn between horror and inevitability. Revenge whispered seductively. One bullet, and Jamal's soul will rest. One bullet, and every lie dies with him. But another voice fought back, the voice of his son, the boy who once said he wanted to build something that lasts. Could Marcus honor that dream by spilling more blood? Or would killing Harlan make him just another cog in the cycle of violence? The question ate at him. Yet the night finally came when doubt could no longer stall him. It was a stormy evening. The sky cracked open with thunder. Rain poured in sheets, drenching the streets in silver. Harlan sat alone in his office, blinds drawn, the glow of a desk lamp haloing his figure. His cigar smoke curled in lazy patterns, the room reeking of power and arrogance. Marcus slipped inside, silent as shadow, his clothes soaked, gun trembling in his hand. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring at the man who had haunted his every nightmare. Harlan didn't flinch. He looked up slowly, as if he had expected Marcus all along. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. I was wondering how long it would take. Marcus's voice was raw, breaking. You killed my son. Harlan leaned back in his chair, exhaling smoke. Your boy made a choice. Wrong place, wrong time. It happens. Don't you dare. Marcus snarled, his hands shaking. He was unarmed. You know it. Harlan shrugged. Doesn't matter what I know. What matters is what people believe. And they believe me. Marcus raised the gun, rage boiling. Not anymore. I have proof. I've got Callis on tape. I've got witnesses. Harlan chuckled, the sound low and cold. And yet, here you are, gun in hand, ready to kill me in cold blood. You think anyone will care about your proof after this? They'll call you a grieving lunatic who snapped. A murderer. You'll prove me right. The words hit like a hammer. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger, but hesitation crept in. Harlan's eyes gleamed as sensing weakness. Look at you, he hissed. You've spent months tearing yourself apart. Lost your job, lost your wife, lost everything. And for what? You're becoming me, Hayes, judge, jury, executioner. That's the irony. You hate me because I represent the system, but deep down, you want the same power. to decide who lives, who dies. Marcus's breath came ragged, torn between fury and despair. I don't want to be you. Then put the gun down, Harland taunted. Walk away, go home to what's left of your family. But we both know you won't. You're too far gone. You need this. You need me dead to feel whole again. Thunder boomed outside, rattling the windows. Marcus's grip wavered, his mind spiraling. Was Harland right? Had his obsession consumed him until he had become the very monster he hunted? He stepped closer, the gun inches from Harland's face. You don't get to live after what you've done. Harland didn't blink. If you kill me, you lose. You'll be locked away. Your daughter will grow up without you, and the machine will keep turning. Another chief will take my place. Nothing changes. You'll be a headline for a week, then forgotten. Marcus's arm trembled violently. He saw Jamal's face in his mind, bright, laughing, alive. Then he saw Renee, broken, begging him to stop, and Ava, terrified, clutching him as though he were the only anchor left in her world. But gun felt heavier than steel. Harland leaned forward, voice oily. Expose me. If you really have the proof, release it. Burn me in the court of public opinion. Watch the system eat me alive. But you won't do it, Hayes. You want blood, not justice, Marcus roared, slamming Harland back in his chair, the barrel pressing hard against his skull. Don't tell me what I want. For a heartbeat, silence consumed the room only, the sound of rain hammering the windows. Marcus's finger curled on the trigger, then he froze. Killing Harland would end one life, but it would also end Marcus's, and worse, it would brand Jamal's memory with the stain of his father's violence. Jamal had dreamed of building, not destroying. If Marcus pulled the trigger, he wouldn't just kill Harland, he'd kill the last piece of his son still alive in him. Marcus let out a broken sob. Slowly he lowered the gun. Harland's smirk returned, victorious. That's what I thought. You don't have the guts. But Marcus's hand darted into his jacket, pulling out a recorder. He pressed play. Harland's own voice filled the room. Most's threats, whispered confessions Marcus had gathered over weeks of digging. Every word damning, every word proof. You're finished, Marcus growled. The world will know what you are. For the first time, fear flickered across Harland's face. He lunged forward, but Marcus slammed him back down. You can't bury the truth anymore. Not this time. Sirens wailed outside, not police this time, but reporters, activists, crowds gathering in the storm. The story Marcus had pieced together had already been sent, transmitted to every outlet, every channel. By the time Harland realized it, the world would already be watching. Harland's mask cracked, rage flooding his features. You think this town will survive without me? Without my order, it'll tear itself apart. Marcus leaned close, whispering, then let it. He turned and walked away, leaving Harland raging in the storm, the gun still heavy but unfired in his hand. The confrontation did not end cleanly. The machine fought back, claws sinking deep. Harland denied everything, called Marcus a liar, claimed the recordings were doctored. Loyal officers rallied, politicians scrambled to protect themselves, but the tide had shifted. The protests grew louder, national eyes fixed on the town. Journalists unearthed more evidence. Families once silenced came forward. The truth spread like wildfire. Marcus had not killed Harland, but in many ways he had destroyed him, and yet, as he stood in the rain outside the precinct, watching chaos unfold, Marcus felt no triumph. His body shook, not from fear but from emptiness. Jamal was still gone. Renee was still broken. Ava's childhood was still scarred. Justice, if it came, would never fill the void. Harland's words haunted him. You're becoming me. Marcus wondered if, in saving his morality, he had lost something else, his peace, his soul, his family. The choice had been made, but the cost remained. The storm that night marked the beginning of the end for Chief Raymond. Harland. The recordings Marcus released spread like wildfire. Within hours, news anchors repeated his threats and boasts on national television. Families long silenced began stepping into the light, their grief echoing Marcus's own. Crowds flooded the courthouse steps, voices rising against years of buried injustice. Harland fought back viciously. He called Marcus a fraud, claimed the evidence was fabricated, blamed agitators for stirring chaos. Loyal officers paraded in front of cameras, swearing that Chief was a hero, but the truth had already slipped from his grasp. The machine that had protected him for decades groaned under the weight of exposure. Investigations launched. The Department of Justice arrived. Harland was suspended, his empire crumbling brick by brick. On paper, it looked like victory. Justice long denied was finally clawing its way into daylight. But for Marcus, it didn't feel like triumph. The town was scarred. Businesses shuttered during protests. Neighbors turned against neighbors, arguments spilling into violence. Some shouted Marcus's name in gratitude, others spattered with hatred, blaming him for tearing apart the fragile fabric of their community. Renee had moved out by then, taking Ava with her to her sister's house across town. Their marriage, already cracked by grief, had splintered completely under the strain of Marcus's crusade. She still answered his calls, but her voice was distant, cautious. Ava needs stability, she said. She can't live in the shadow of your war. Her words pierced deeper than any knife. He had fought for his family, for his son's memory, but in the process he had lost the ones still breathing. At night, Marcus wandered the empty house, its walls echoing with silence. Jamal's room remained untouched, shoes still by the bed, textbooks open on the desk, posters curling at the corners. Marcus sat on the floor for hours, staring at the emptiness, begging for a voice that would never answer. The victory felt hollow. Justice had been served in headlines and indictments, but Jamal was still gone. Nothing could fill that void. The day of Harlan's trial arrived months later. Marcus stood among the crowd outside the courthouse, rain dripping down his collar, watching the once untouchable chief escorted in shackles. Harlan's hair was disheveled, his face pale, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, still burned with defiance. Their gazes locked across the crowd. For a heartbeat, Marcus felt the same fury that had nearly driven him to pull the trigger that night. But now, there was something else: pity. Harlan was no longer a titan, no longer a symbol of unbreakable power. He was just a man, old and crumbling, facing the consequences of his lies. The gavel fell, guilty on multiple counts. Harlan was led away, his empire reduced to rubble. The crowd erupted in cheers. Reporters shoved microphones forward, demanding Marcus's reaction. But he said nothing. He turned and walked away, the noise fading into nothing, because inside, there was no celebration, only silence. In the weeks that followed, Marcus became a ghost in his own life. He attended funerals for victims' families, holding hands with mothers who wept the same way Renee once had. They thanked him for giving them a voice, for tearing down the wall of silence. He nodded, offered hollow words of comfort, but each thank you deepened the weight on his chest, because he knew the truth. He hadn't saved them. He hadn't healed them. He had only exposed the wounds, raw and bleeding, for the world to gawk at one evening. He stood at Jamal's grave, the grass damp beneath his shoes. The headstone was simple: Jamal Hayes, 2006 to 2023. Beloved son, brother, dreamer. Marcus traced the letters with trembling fingers. We got him, son, he whispered. His voice cracked. The chief is gone. The truth is out. Wind rustled the trees, carrying silence as his only answer. Marcus's shoulders sagged, tears spilling freely. But you're still gone, and I don't know if it was worth it. God, I don't know anymore. He sank to his knees, clutching the earth, sobbing until his chest ached. Around him, the cemetery lay still, rows of stones marking lives cut short. He realized Jamal was just one of many, a single story among countless buried truths. And though Harlan had fallen, the system that birthed him still loomed, waiting for another man to step into his place. Was this victory, or just another battle in a war that never ends? When Marcus returned home, he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. He barely recognized the man staring back, eyes hollow, face gaunt, hair flecked with gray that hadn't been there a year ago. He had one, yet he looked like he had lost everything. Harlan's words echoed in his head. You're becoming me. Was it true? Had his obsession consumed him so fully that he had mirrored the very man he despised? Marcus leaned against the glass, pressing his forehead to the cool surface. Who am I now? He whispered. The mirror had no answer. The last time he saw Renee and Ava was at a park, months after the trial. Ava ran toward him, arms outstretched, and he lifted her high, spinning her as she laughed. For a brief moment, sunlight broke through his darkness, but when he looked up, Renee stood at a distance, watching with guarded eyes. You did what you had to do, she said quietly when Ava ran off to the swings. But we're not the same anymore. Marcus, I don't know if we can ever be. Marcus nodded, swallowing the ache in his throat. He understood. His fight had saved others, but it had cost him his family. When Ava hugged him goodbye, she whispered, "Don't give up, Daddy." It was the only thing that kept him breathing, and so Marcus walked alone, through streets that still bore scars of protest, past buildings with boarded windows, past neighbors who whispered or turned away. He carried his son's memory like a torch, but also like a chain. Some nights, he imagined Jamal walking beside him, smiling, whole. Other nights he woke from dreams of pulling the trigger on Harlan, wondering if his restraint had been strength or weakness. The world called him a hero, Families saw him as a savior. But when Marcus looked in the mirror, he saw only a broken man who had traded everything for a justice that felt like ash. The final image. Marcus at the cemetery once more, standing before Jamal's grave as dusk settled. He wore a worn coat, hands buried deep in his pockets, eyes distant. Behind him the city buzzed with life, a fragile attempt to move forward. Before him lay silence, the earth holding what could never be returned. He whispered, "I hope I made you proud." His voice cracked on the last word. Then he turned, walking slowly into the fading light, not triumphant, not healed, just a father, broken and hollow, carrying the weight of justice that had come far too late. The question lingered in the air, unanswered, echoing into the night. Was it worth it?